Blom, blom, blom. Doom, doom, doom. Blom, 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 blom. Doom, 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 doom. The first time Arthur Guitar Boogie Smith's composition, Feudin' Banjos, now that's Feudin', F-U-E-D-I-N apostrophe, not feuding, but Feudin' Banjos like scuffling hillbillies. The first time that composition received wide-scale airing for the public was when Sheriff Andy Taylor played this little composition with the Darlings. In the video clip that I saw, it appears to feature two guitars, a banjo, a mandolin, and a string bass. The Darlings on the Andy Griffith Show were actually portrayed by a group of people called the Dillards, and they're an actual bluegrass group. We are so used to that song being played with a banjo and a guitar that we lose the idea that it was originally written and originally titled Feudin' Banjos and featured the composer playing a 4-string plectrum banjo offset or dueling with a guy named Ron Reno playing a 5-string banjo. Most people who aren't bluegrass fans or who aren't banjo aficionados only know the song from the movie Deliverance, and they associate banjo music with being so far out in the woods the Presbyterians are handling snakes. In the famous scene in the movie, you have a guy sitting on a porch swing and he's got the banjo, and you've got one of the guys who are about to travel down the river, and he's got an acoustic guitar. Well, the scene featured a guy named Billy Redden, a local boy from Rabun, Georgia. And the director chose him based simply on his skinny frame, his large head, and his almond-shaped eyes, because he felt like this was a natural choice to play the part of an inbred from the backwoods. I'm not sure that Billy Redden should be complimented by this choice. But Billy Redden played the mentally challenged, inbred, but savant-level banjo player named Lonnie. Who knew? Billy Redden played Lonnie, but he did not play the banjo. A local musician named Mike Addis was brought in to depict the movement of the boy's left hand. Redden actually wore a special shirt that allowed the real banjo player to hide behind him. And the scene was shot with carefully chosen camera angles to conceal the player, whose arms were slipped in and around Redden's waist. Ironically, the hidden banjo player's hands are shown, and he's shown playing in what's known as the bar-fingered claw hammer style, while the banjo music heard on the soundtrack was actually played in the 3-finger Earl Scruggs style using finger picks. Now, what led me down this musical rabbit hole? Well, I got to thinking about the concept of dueling, and I got to thinking about the concept of dueling or things that oppose each other or things that are dichotomous because of something that I heard retired coach Nick Saban say. Coach Saban was speaking to a group of people, and I was lucky enough to be in the audience. I was a guest of my brother Gerald Jones and his wife Missy. And Saban was talking, and he said being a collegiate player and an NFL draft pick boiled down to 2 words, and or but. He explained that when you talked about an athlete, you would use one of those 2 words, and they often played out like this. You're talking about this guy and you say, hey, this guy's a great receiver. He practices hard. He works out. He knows his assignment every play. He's a natural athlete and he goes to class. He makes good grades. He's selfless. He makes good choices. He has good morals. He's honest. Or you could be talking about the same guy and the conversation goes like this. This guy's a great receiver. He practices hard. He works out. He knows his assignment every play, is a natural athlete, but he does not go to class. He may not graduate. He's in a lot of trouble. He makes bad choices off the field. You see, the difference between a draft pick and a guy whose football career ends in college is not really about talent. It boils down to and or but. And they got me thinking about the things that are mutually exclusive. They got me thinking about the things that are pairs or just duels that duel. The distinction between success and failure, the distinction between satisfaction and disappointment, the distinction between contentment or resentment, the difference in being fulfilled or being empty. And it really boils down to these pairs of words, and you get to choose how you use them or how people use them about you. Disciplined people learn to choose what they want most over what they want now. People who are good in relationships choose to put their loved ones' needs above their own rights. Those whom we trust, and if we are to become people who are trustworthy or people of trust, it's going to be the difference in being perceived as selfish or selfless. Saban also said that discipline was, do you simply have enough self-control to say yes to the things that you should and no to the things that you shouldn't? In order to be balanced people, we need to distinguish between all or nothing thinking. This is a common cognitive distortion where the concepts of ideal and unacceptable are divided by a razor-thin margin rather than a broad continuum. Example, if I didn't do everything right, I didn't do anything right. If everyone isn't happy, then no one is happy. There's a lot of room for accepting the fact that I can be or do my best and not necessarily be the best. Be careful not to confuse merely winning and losing with success and failure. You see, winning and losing have things to do with scoreboards and referees and uncontrollables, but success and failure has to do with the process. And the process can be as valuable as the product. And once the process is repeated or ingrained, the product will follow. You can do outcome-based coaching or performance-based coaching. Outcomes focus on rings, trophies, and standings, and performance-based coaching focuses on improvements, and those improvements lead to rings, trophies, and standings and mastery. Dealing with adversity is a simple matter of seeing the things that we encounter as obstacles or opportunities. I talk a lot about intentional adversity, doing things that other people will not do so you can do the things that people cannot do. Leading other people boils down to having influence or wielding power. People who attend churches, especially people who are extremely conservative in their churches, they need to understand that we often have different traditions. And just because something makes one uncomfortable, it does not by default mean it is unscriptural. And just because something is legal doesn't mean it's right. Understanding the spirit of the law is better than manipulating the letter of the law. Knowing the difference in rules or being controlled or ruled by values. This is the whole problem with Karens, Pharisees, OSHA, and Pharisees named Karen, by the way. The difference in unite and untie boils down to where you put the I. When you start talking about groups, communities, families, marriages, organizations, sports teams, the difference in illness and wellness is whether or not it's I or we. The fundamental skill in communication is the difference between merely hearing or actually listening. And when you listen, are you listening to respond or are you listening to gain understanding about the other person? Knowledge is what you know. Wisdom is being able to apply that knowledge. Knowledge is knowing that a tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is knowing not to put it in fruit salad. The process is often more valuable than the product. And that's true in sports, business, charities, and churches. Toughness is not what you can dish out, but toughness is measured by what you can endure. As a peacemaker or an initiator of good, it's important to distinguish between our motives. Did we do what we do or stop doing what we did or change what we changed because we were giving in, giving out, giving up? Or were we simply purely just giving? The way I treat people or respond to people should have way more to do with an attitude than with my emotions. Emotions are the reaction. The attitude is how I handle what I choose to do after experiencing the emotion. One is choice, one is not. Just because I'm not like you, do not think like you, does not mean I do not like you. C.S. Lewis said that salvation boils down to the statement, not my will, but yours. And in explaining this, he said that we will say that to God, not my will, but yours, and we'll be saved. Or God will say it to us, explaining why we are lost. He will look at us and my intention was for you to live this way and do this and be in fellowship with me, but it's not my will, but your will. And since we're free moral agents and we get to choose, we can choose to be lost. But if we do, it will be because God says that to us rather than we said it to God, not my will, but your will. And then there's this simple thing of yes and no. In every one of these pairs, in each of these duels, everything you say yes to represents something else that you will or you have said no to. And so when you start thinking about dueling banjos or dueling values or dueling choices, remember when you're making these choices, it really boils down to choosing between two concepts. It really boils down between distinguishing between two levels of value, if you will. When you said yes to this and no to this, when you said no to this and yes to this, when you chose this over that or that over this, what did it cost? And what is it actually worth?